I grew up in a very rural part of northern New York, which I think is a forgotten part of the state. Like, people don't think about the North Country a lot. And as a kid, I was a huge sports fan. My dad was a big Yankees fan. We would get the Daily News and the New York Post, and I would, scour them to make scrapbooks out of. I collected cards. But when you're in a place where people don't think a lot about, and you love sports, you kind of feel like you need to get some attention. And so I would write teams. I would write to the Yankees. I would write to the Rangers, the Giants, the Knicks, and say, hey, I'm a fan, please send me something. And they would send stuff back then. The front offices were great at sending things. But I also felt like we had good people too, coming from where I was living. We had people who went on.
Where are you coming from? Where is this?
Northern New York. So I grew up in St. Lawrence County, and I went to the same school as Rick Carlisle, who played in the NBA and coached for a long time. It is where the soccer style kicking in pro football began, because there was a Hungarian refugee in my hometown in the 50s who was a soccer player who couldn't play soccer because there was no soccer there in the 50s, and learned to kick footballs and went on to Cornell and went on to play with the Bills, Pete Gogolak. Stories like that always inspired me. I mean, as a kid, I wished more people knew about them. I felt like we were kind of New York's hidden secret, much the way Chautauqua County is to me now. And so I was always wanting to get attention on these people, and I'd be reading biographies and going to the library just to find sports figures books, and I was excited about sports in general, but I was especially excited about baseball players because baseball was my sport. And the story I like to tell a lot of people is when I was 9, I was obsessed with Ron Guidry. Mm-hmm. So much so that I wrote to Yankees Magazine, I wrote to Baseball Digest. I was trying to get his attention. And this was a time where we didn't have a washer and dryer at home, so every Friday my mom would take us to the laundromat. And we also didn't have a phone in my apartment growing up. And so the payphone at the laundromat became this sort of prize for us of like playing around with it, making calls or trying to figure out how to use it. And I got an idea around 9 that I wanted to call Ron Guidry. And I mean, what 9-year-old doesn't want to meet their idol? And so I'm in rural northern New York, and I'm on the payphone trying to get a hold of Ron Guidry. And the directory assistance woman says, we don't have a listing in Lafayette, Louisiana for a Ronald Guidry, but we do have a Roland Guidry. And since I had read Ron Guidry's autobiography, I thought, yeah, that's his father, Roland. So I said, yes, please, I will, please connect me to him. And I'm sure he must have been stunned when he got on the phone with me. He accepted the collect call. He got on the phone with me, and he hears this, 9-year-old boy's voice. And we talk. We talk about my love of Ron Guidry. I remember he said to me, I said, I love Ron Guidry. I love your son. And he said, oh, I love him too. And I said, I collect all of his cards, and I really want to meet him. And he was such a fatherly figure about it. Like, he had recognized that I was excited and enthusiastic, but he was also realistic too. And he talked about maybe going to a game one day, and maybe I would get to see him at a game. And I did. A couple of years later, I ended up going to a game at Yankee Stadium, and not by any planning on my dad's part. It just happened that we were with family, and we traveled to Yankee Stadium. And who was on the mound but Ron Guidry? And I got to watch him shut out the Royals August 23rd, 1981. And that is probably one of my favorite days of my life as a kid, as an adult even. I look back at that day and think I was 10 years old, and I'm seeing my hero pitch. And this, to me, is what life's about, is you're excited about something, and you get to experience that thing firsthand in person.
So you graduate from high school to play sports?
I played baseball through school. I loved baseball. I was an outfielder with a pitcher's glove, which meant, pitcher's gloves are a bit smaller. And so I tried out for pitching my senior year, and they said no, and I'd already bought the glove. So I was kind of stuck with the glove. And it meant I had to work even harder to catch hits. And one of my favorite experiences was we were playing this little other town in northern New York. And they had, for some reason, they had an outfield of evergreen trees. Not a fence, but evergreen trees dotted along the outfield. And I gave all my top speed to catch this ball going over the trees. And I caught the ball, and I wiped out 3 of their trees. And they said it was a home run, and the umpire said, no, he caught it, it's an out. And I credit the small glove, because it made me run a lot faster. Yeah.
So you become a high school phenom, Willie Mays of your high school.
Yep.
And then you, what do you do after that? Do you graduate?
I graduated. I went to college. Didn't like the college experience. I stayed through it all 4 years. Studied acting. Acting was more interesting at that point to me. I thought I was going to be an actor. I thought I'd be a theater actor.
What college did you go to?
St. Lawrence University.
St. Lawrence, sure.
So Kirk Douglas, Viggo Mortensen, they're alum there at that time. And I think, yeah, this is my path is going to be in acting, in theater and something. And what I realized is I just wanted to perform. I really just wanted to perform. And so I ended up getting a job at a radio station doing sales and pitched myself doing other things like sports broadcasting, which I got to do high school sports like girls basketball and hockey and things like that. And at that point, my career went in some weird ways because I just wanted to be on the air. I didn't want to do sales, and so I took a DJ job, and then I took a job in the same market in Watertown where I was DJing, and also I was doing fill-in weather. And I had no weather experience. I mean, I literally had no meteorology experience, and so there I'm on TV, like, telling people what the weather is. And what the coolest part of it wasn't that I was on TV, but I was on TV in my home area, so like my parents were seeing me.
You're a celebrity.
Yeah, that's kind of how it felt. It's like, it was the station that everybody watched for news, and so there I was being able to be the guy that told the weather. But that wasn't even my passion, though. Again, it was just performance. It was all performance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but that probably didn't last forever because here you are. So did you get a sense where the aha moment came in your life?
I've done a lot of different things. Like I've produced news. I've worked at a model and talent agency. I did a lot of things where I was sort of dancing around different parts of entertainment. I thought for a long time I wanted to be an actor who was in TV shows and movies, and I kind of explored a lot of that. And I'm still part of SAG-AFTRA, and I still do some acting. But it wasn't until I was in LA in 2017, and I was in an acting class that was being taught by Glenn Morshower, who's a character actor. He's been in a ton of things like Transformers and movies like that. And he had us do scenes every week. So every Friday night in our class, we would do scenes. And everyone in the class would pick scenes that they knew. Like they would pick movies and TV shows. And I didn't want to do any of that. I wanted to write. I wanted to write my own stories. And most of the stories I was doing then weren't necessarily true stories of real people like a Howard Ehmke. What they were was real experiences I had, things I had done. Like, for example, I went on a mission trip to West Virginia in 2016, and this was the election year, Trump country, and I got to work on houses where people were pretty much economically destitute. But the stories were amazing. The stories were fantastic, and they were stories about what was life like in the 50s in tobacco country, when someone is coming home from school and their 3-year-old sibling is smoking a cigarette on the porch. I ate all that up. I mean, that was the gold for me, was hearing real people talk about things. It wasn't necessarily stories that I would turn into something bigger, but I would take that idea and turn it into a 5-page script for the class and sort of take those experiences I had personally and synthesize them and put them into fun scenes. And sometimes there were dramas, sometimes there were comedies, sometimes there were a mix of both. But it was a great platform to say someone wants to see your work, someone wants to hear your storytelling, and you can workshop it, and you'll have these other actors to use. They're your people in the scene, and you've got your acting teacher who will help you shape it into what would be more like a real performance in production. So it was exciting. That's really, I think, the aha moment for me for writing was when someone said, I'm giving you permission to write whatever you want to write about.
So that's about 8 years ago you started that.
Yeah.
And during that, give me the arc over this past 8 years. What have you been doing?
Mainly writing. I mean, I hit a point where I was in the newspaper archives around the fall of 2018. I was having some real housing instability in LA. And LA is a very expensive place to live, and I was bouncing from Airbnb to Airbnb trying to figure out what I was doing there. And I comforted myself by getting in the newspaper archives. New York has great newspaper archives. And I was looking at my own family stories. And I would find a mention of my grandfather courting my grandmother, and things like that, where I'd find other mentions of an uncle winning an award in high school. And I realized if those things are in there, there's got to be a lot more in there. And then I started looking at other things that, for example, my football story about Pete Gogolak. I have a script about Pete Gogolak, the Hungarian refugee who was the first soccer star kicker. I wanted to know what his experiences were like coming to a little town like Ogdensburg, New York. Were they well received? Yes, they were. Was he an outsider a bit? Yes, he was, because he didn't speak any English. How did he learn to play football? It's all in the newspaper. Like, the newspapers were a gold mine for finding out that information. So I started researching those things and then realizing that I wanted to tell these stories in a longer narrative form. I didn't want them to be short stories. I want them to be screenplays. I want them to be something that, could be made into a movie one day. And there's so much of that information. It kind of makes me sad a little bit, too, to think about the fact that with social media now, we lose all those great, rich stories in the newspapers that, for generations were sitting there. But I was down rabbit holes every night, and I was putting together all kinds of long lists of notes and trying to assemble some sense of who the person was and what the context of their time period was and how they're being written about in their time period.
So let's talk about Pete Gogolak, because I'm of an age where I remember watching him play and his brother Charlie. He was clearly one of the heroes in a kind of hero-less time period for the Bills. I mean, he was the guy. So talk a little bit about Pete Gogolak.
He has got an amazing story. I mean, I think about the fact that he was raised in Budapest during the Hungarian Revolution, and he tells a great story about them being so broke that they would roll up a sock and play soccer with that. And my thought is, that's what you do as a kid. You think about loving the sport so much that you'll do anything to play that sport. And as the story goes, he and his family were escaping overnight, going from Hungary to the Austrian border. And they had this great adventure. And I think about, as a kid who never really left rural New York State, I wasn't a world explorer, how shocking it must have been at 14 years old to be traveling during a really highly, volatile time, having his first car ride. He gets his first car ride ever as part of that escape. He has his first plane ride. He lands in New Jersey. Eisenhower brings over 250,000 Hungarian refugees, and there he is at an army base in New Jersey. If his family had stayed in New Jersey or New York, we would know Pete Gogolak because he would have been a soccer player. He would have played soccer in the city somewhere. But because his father was a doctor, he could only work in the United States at a state-run facility. He had to go back to school, basically, if he was going to work somewhere else. So he found a job in my hometown, and the family all moved there, and that's why Pete Gogolak learned to play football. He was there as a late freshman, sophomore year. He, I think, watched some football. It wasn't until junior year that they had him try out, and he kicked the ball, and everyone thought, this is weird. This guy kicks a very strange way. He kicks with the side of his foot. He kicks the ball far, but it's certainly not going to do anything because it's low to the ground. And he improved and worked on it. And since his father worked at the state hospital, he and his brother Charlie would be playing football around patients. Their audience would be mental patients, basically, psychiatric patients who would be watching them. And I think about how quirky that must have been to be in that setting, and to be the outsider in the town, which also, I think, feeds this story nicely, too, because a lot of people in that town, there's a huge sports town. Ogdensburg is a huge sports town. They used to have a professional baseball team there. There's been a lot of leagues over the years, baseball and softball. But when you're an outsider, you don't think about how things were done. And for Pete Gogolak, it was probably the perfect recipe to come in and learn to play football, learn to be a place kicker, and then shock people because he was kicking field goals when people didn't even know what field goals were. In that high school league, he would travel to places like Potsdam and Saranac Lake, and people were thinking, this is a phenomenal player. I don't think anyone at that time was thinking he was going to go on to college or the pros. But I think his recipe was so perfect to create this unique kind of playing. And then he lands in Buffalo, plays for the Bills for a couple of championship
Did he go to
seasons.
Cornell?
Yep, went to Cornell.
Did Charlie too?
Charlie went to Princeton.
Okay, that's right.
Yep.
That's right.
Yeah. And it's funny, too, because Pete's middle name is Cornell with a K. So I don't know as a kid, do you choose Cornell because of that? Who knows? They might have had a good football program, but there's also that symmetry with, hey, my middle name's Cornell, and this is Cornell, and maybe it's meant to be,
So he ends up in Buffalo, and the rest, it's a hard stop for me.
Yeah.
Then what happens to him after football? Did you track down Cornell?
I did. He actually has a book. He's written a book about that, about his post-career. And he doesn't have a lot to do with football. He's great in business. He's started businesses, launched businesses, had a wonderful career, had a wonderful family. But I think he has some negative thoughts about where football went when he was playing and after he played. So I feel like he still comments on it on occasion, but it's not something that he has, like the current game, he doesn't have a great affinity for, I think.
Where is he?
He's in New England.
Is he?
Yep.
Yeah.
Same with Charlie. Yeah.
Charlie, yeah.
And they go home. There was a big, a few years ago, there was a big anniversary celebration in my hometown, dedication for them, and they both showed up. I wish I had been able to get there. Friends and contacts back there had told me about how it went. I got to see pictures and video. And it was,
Ogdensburg.
yeah, in Ogdensburg. It was wonderful to me. It was so heartwarming to me to know that they recognized how pivotal this town was to them. And they didn't forget it, after having great careers in pro football, they remembered. It's still the place where they learned to play the game.
So you do all this research on Pete Gogolak specifically. What'd you do with it?
So that script is a finished script. It's a spec script. I am trying to pitch it now to producers. There's a great deal of it that is in Hungarian, not in actual Hungarian, but it's suggested that these lines would be spoken. Family stories would be spoken. Family scenes, both in Hungary and in New York State, would be spoken in the Hungarian language. It's about 110 pages, which is pretty standard for that kind of movie. And it doesn't focus anything really on his college or pro football career. It's really the making of Pete Gogolak as a kicker. So the main focus is picking him up from the Revolution in October 1956, and then going through his graduation, and knowing where he's bound. He's bound for college, and that's kind of where it ends. But there is a bit of a wraparound with he's kicking his very first field goal here in Buffalo at the very beginning and the end. So you get a sense that he's kicking it, and it kind of wraps. The idea is that it wraps around to he gets the field goal, they win the game, and we know the rest of the story from that point on.
Are there much film archives of Pete?
I don't see as much as I'd like. It's interesting to get on things like YouTube and see any kind of film of him. I have seen film. There's more of him in Buffalo. There's not a lot of him in the high school level, and it makes me wonder if it's the film that does exist just hasn't been put on a platform like YouTube. Because if I ask people who lived in that area at the time, I'm sure somebody, had home movies and was recording football games back in the late 50s. So I think it must exist out there somewhere.
What's your is it going to be a film documentary, or is it would be a play?
So I'm glad you asked that question because, I worked in news, and if I had never been an actor, I think I probably would be focusing on straight documentaries. But because I like acting, I like performing, I like that version of storytelling, I want to see Pete as Pete, not the version that we would see a picture of him and we'd talk about him. I want to see someone playing Pete. What does that look like? What does that feel like? So the films I write are not documentaries, but they're more narrative storytelling. So it'd be, a 14-year-old Pete who's escaping Hungary and a 16-year-old Pete who's learning to talk to girls in America and, having those relationships and learning how to play the game of football. And we get to see his perspective of it all.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. So from that, and obviously you took a personality who was a hometown personality. Curious as all get out, how does one then land with a Howard Ehmke from Silver Creek, New York? So
I only write about things that I've had personal contact with. I'm somebody who is quite visual and literal. Howard is not my first baseball story. My first baseball story is my own, which is a weird story because it's the story of my love of Ron Guidry and how that came to be. Mm-hmm. And I took that story and I wrote that script and I put it on Facebook that I wrote this script. And somebody, a Facebook friend who's a filmmaker in Dallas said, I have a friend who should know about what you're doing. And you might want to tell her. And her name is Mindy, and Mindy's in New York. And I said, okay, well, let me know how to find her. And she said, well, here's her name and here's her Facebook page. Send her a message. And she didn't really prep me on who Mindy was. It turns out Mindy Levine is who it was. And Mindy Levine is the husband of the Yankees president, Randy Levine. So I was contacting Mindy Levine with my script. And she was amazing. She is amazing. She's seen 2 versions of it. And because of the connection I've had there, when I've gone to New York, she's given me tickets. I've got to see the Yankees twice. I was there a couple years ago when they were playing the Guardians in the playoffs. And then this past May, I was there with my daughter and a friend, and she gave us great seats to see a game on a Sunday afternoon. And she's been a fantastic support system and advocate for that writing. So it felt good to get that off my chest because it's my story. It's a personal story. It's my quest to meet my hero. and what that looked like back in 1979. So when I got to Sunset Bay in October, I was relocating from San Antonio. My daughter goes to University of Buffalo, and I landed in the off season. I said, I'm going to just spend a few months in Sunset Bay and kind of figure out.
This year?
Yeah, this past year. Yeah, I just got in October, did the big long drive from San Antonio. I got in. I was immediately the next day had to go fly to London to work, and then to New York, and then I came back a week later, and I started exploring. And the first thing I got to do was go to Silver Creek, and I see this sign outside Ehmke Well Drillers that says the childhood home of Howard Ehmke. And you could hear the sound of like the brakes in the car. That's kind of what I was doing. I hit the brakes because I was thinking, wait a minute, where am I? Like, what is this? And I read the sign, looked at the house, I kind of just took in the moment. Didn't know about the baseball field at that point that's got a sign on it as well. Didn't know that yet. Hadn't been down there. But I started getting in the newspaper archives, and I'm reading about this guy, Howard Ehmke, who was a contemporary of Babe Ruth. And I'm thinking, I've never heard the name. Maybe I've heard it in passing at some point in my life, maybe in my childhood when I was doing a lot more reading of old-time baseball. But his name wasn't a household name to me. And I felt like, how do I not know this guy? He has this amazing feat in the World Series. And I start digging in everything I could find about him, and started thinking about the fact that maybe this is a story. Maybe he does have a story because he's a contemporary of some great players. I mean, Ruth, Gehrig, Ty Cobb. He played for Ty Cobb. Ty Cobb traded him. He played for Connie Mack. I started thinking, what was his story really? And it wasn't even the baseball. It was the other piece of his life that made me realize, oh, this is the story. This is a guy who has a major league career, who's had success. But in the midst of that, he decides he's going to also add this other piece, which is making baseball infield tarp. I thought, what a strange thing. But I have to remember, too, I had to reset and think, this is a time where baseball players worked in the offseason. No one was getting rich. Even Babe Ruth wasn't, he was doing well with his endorsements. So I started thinking, I think Howard Ehmke has a story. I think there's more gold here to mine, and what's that going to look like?
So, carry on. I mean, how do you mine it? I mean, you are an outsider. You're an outsider. You stumble on to Chautauqua County, Silver Creek, drive around, see a sign, curiosity, which clearly you have a boatload of. Mm-hmm. You dig deep. Do you go to the Historical Society? Do you follow up with the Ehmke Tarp Company?
I did. That's actually one of the first things I did is I got online. I found out that Ehmke Manufacturing still exists. I looked at their website. I noticed that they don't do tarp anymore, which I'm sure has gone on to other companies. They do a lot of work for the military. Mm-hmm. That was fascinating to me. And there was a moment where I realized, some of my mentors have talked about this. When you're writing something, you have to be the most excited about it. If you're not the most excited about it, no one's going to be more excited than you. No one you're going to meet is going to be more excited. So you have to be the most excited, and you have to be able to convey that you're the most excited. And what I did with the Ehmkes was I just got on their website, looked at the contact information, and said, I'm going to email the top guy. And I'm going to say, hey, you don't know me, but I'm here in Chautauqua County. I'm near Silver Creek. Your founder's from here. I'm fascinated by a story, and I'm working on a script. And I think like a little time passed by, and I immediately thought, oh, they probably don't care. This is not going to get seen. And I was so wrong, because it was the exact opposite. They were very excited about what I was doing. They were extremely thrilled to know that I was honoring their founder and digging into his story and wanting to assemble something. They sent me books about not only the history of their manufacturing, but also manufacturing in Philadelphia in general. So that was super helpful. And on Howard's birthday back in April, I made a graphic. There's an old map that circulates of Silver Creek with, on the bottom it's got I think people's names and addresses. And it's this wonderful, it looks almost like topographical, where there's a lot of texture and hills, and you see the houses. And I just decided I was going to make a graphic where there's this giant, he's not 6'3", he's like 106'3", he's this giant Howard Ehmke standing on the middle of Silver Creek, and he's pitching, and there's statistics about it, and on this date he was born. And I sent it to them, and they sent it through the whole company. The CEO sent that graphic to the whole company to honor their founder. And that made me even more excited that what I was working on was exciting to them and interesting to them. And And I should have never second-guessed that. I mean, it's their founder. It's their name on the company. And why would they want to know this story and know that somebody's doing something about it?
So now you decide at some point you got this energy level is down with Philadelphia with the business side of it, which is really intriguing. You got the baseball, a little bit of nuggets, but now you got to dig deep. When do you decide that there's something more here that could turn into a play, a movie, a documentary? Is there kind of you wake up one morning to take a shower and say, this is it?
I think it's because I talk to people about it. So I'll be the person who shows up and say, guess what I found out? Or this is amazing. I can't believe I found this. And when I get the reactions I get, I think that's where I get sort of the fuel or the juice to do those things. I remember years ago, I was talking at a film event in LA, and I was mentioning the Gogolak story to somebody who worked at Disney. And it's just a pitch. I'm not pitching the project as a whole. It's just a sort of a pitch of, hey, this is what I'm working on. And that got legs. Like, people would respond very positively. And the same thing with Howard Ehmke. It's the idea that this was a guy who faced Babe Ruth. And at the height of Babe Ruth's fame, he had an opponent that was very respected and did well against him, struck him out a number of times, pivotal times, and then had this great career-ending, amazing game, this historic game that people talked about for years. You don't know his name. And I think that's the hook for when I'm telling people the story, is that this guy, you're not going to know his name, but he accomplished some feats that created a legacy in the game. And you know the Babe Ruths, you know the Ty Cobbs, but like I don't want to tell their story. People have told their story. This is the one I want to tell. And so I think sometimes it's getting that firsthand feedback when you pitch a project or pitch a log line or just a short synopsis to somebody, and you watch the reaction and you see what catches their attention. And I get more excited to say, oh, but there's more. That's just the beginning.
So you're at this stage, and today is July 30th, 2024 for the camera. Where are you in the process of this? I mean, you got from enthusiasm less than a year ago to here we are in July.
So I did a whole script I wanted to do a big, epic, sweeping story about Howard Ehmke, because I love his story that much, and there's so much to tell there. So I wrote a whole script that covers him from around 1920 to 1930, with a bit of 1940, 1950 in it. I wanted this big picture look at his life. Some smaller parts where he gets married, they don't have kids. I think that's a bit of a factor in his life. He's always in love with baseball. He's in love with baseball so much that when he signs a contract in 1930, he can't play, he retires. Connie Mack pays him for the whole season. But then 1931, he comes back and says, hey, I'm thinking about playing again. And that makes the papers. And then 1944, when there's a potential devastation to baseball where we lose so many players to the war, there's Howard Ehmke again in the newspaper saying, I would come out of retirement at age 50 to pitch again. I'm thinking this guy doesn't quit. And I love the culmination of his story in that first script, because the ending is he's listening to the record being broken by Erskine in the 53 World Series when Erskine's pitching for the Brooklyn Dodgers pitching against the Yankees. And I wanted to sort of bring it to this full moment that he's been riding this wave of success with making the tarp, with his legacy in baseball, and now at the end he's surrendering it. And I hit a point where I thought maybe that's too much. Maybe trying to convince a person who doesn't know Howard's story at all to sit through a movie where we're covering so much is a lot to demand. And so I went back to the drawing board and said, what if we just look at 1929? And we start at the end of 1928, where the Yankee dynasty is still going on. He's listening. He's in his manufacturing place in Philadelphia, across from Shibe Park. He's listening to the Yankees on the radio. And then it moves to spring training, and he's not a starter, and he's named, I think, a pitching coach around that time as well. He's struggling to get time on the mound. His business is doing well, and he's not sure about his future in baseball. And he's got this new hesitation pitch from the previous season that was helping him, but he's not getting to pitch much. And then something really different happens in that in August of that year, Connie Mack proposes something to me that's very unique. I don't know what kind of scouting there was in baseball in 1929, but he gets sent to scout the Cubs. At that point in the season, Philly, the A's are in first place, the Cubs are in first place. It's almost a guarantee that these two teams are going to match each other in the World Series. And Connie Mack says to Howard Ehmke, we're going to head west. We're going to have our last road trip to the west. I want you to stay behind and scout our future opponent in the World Series. And he does. And he watches the Cubs sweep the Phillies. And to me, like, I think the concentrated version of his story just in 1929 can have moments, can have flashbacks to he was the guy that gave the first home run to Babe Ruth. A Yankee stated he was the pitcher who had a no-hitter and a one-hitter back in September of 23. Those things can be woven in to the story. They definitely can be put in other places as references and flashbacks. But if we just focus on 1929, this guy has no reason to be pitching in the World Series. The story starts off with he really should be retiring. He does not have his stuff. He's 35. He's over the hill at that point. The newspapers are calling him ancient. And then there's a satisfaction to he has a comeback in September. And I love the way that the newspaper said, like, this was a guy who was indifferent. He was indifferent before, but now he has these strong outings, including one against the Yankees. And now we have a story to tell that's really much more condensed, but has all the same highs and lows, all the excitement of baseball, the excitement of this player at the end of his career, that I think it plays better that we see him in a fashion where the end is near, the end should be near, and he should be ready to leave baseball, but he sticks it out. And because he sticks it out, he creates a legacy for himself. I mean, that to me is probably the best takeaway is to anybody watching, whether you like baseball or not, like, don't give up on what you want. And for him, it was being in the World Series.
So when, without tipping the script too much, but at some point he's out scouting, and Connie Mack, certainly this is the urban legend. You know, he's kind of away scouting, and surprisingly to the world, the press, the starting pitcher, to the chagrin probably of Lefty Grove and George Earnshaw and all those guys, it's this old timer. It's like bringing in Tom Tellman, you know, nowadays. You know.
By the way, Tellman is another Ehmke. When I was looking at him the other night, I was looking at this guy. I mean, angular features, 6'3", 190 pounds, right-hander. I'm like, I'm talking to Howard Ehmke. That's how I felt with meeting Tellman.
I saw that in the TikTok. By the way, I sent that to Tom.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, he's got it.
High five him.
Is there a point where, that Connie Mack says, at least privately, that I really want you to pitch that opening day?
I think it's a carrot. I think it's a carrot for Howard Ehmke. I think he wants him to return to his old self. He wants him to be the pitcher that he knows him to be. I go back to 1923. So, you know, it starts with Ehmke giving up the first home run in Yankee Stadium. And then in September, he no-hits Connie Mack's team. I think that's probably when he was probably first on Connie Mack's radar. And at that point, Connie Mack in 1923 says, I want this guy. You know, I need to rebuild this team. I need to maybe spend a little bit of money, which he wasn't spending much at the time. But I need to rebuild this team if we're ever going to get to the series. And he does so well in Boston, of all places. If you can win in Boston, you know, I think Connie Mack was thinking, hey, this guy's got, you know, I got a chance, and he trades for him. The thing that surprised me that I found out was that Miller Huggins wanted him. And I thought to myself, if Miller Huggins had gotten him in 1926, he would have been in the series. And again, we probably wouldn't know Howard Ehmke's name today in the same way we do because of 1929. So that's also part of the story, is Miller Huggins wanting Howard Ehmke at some point. But to answer your question about 1929, I feel like Connie Mack played it up in the series. I feel like he made it look to people like he hadn't made a decision. I don't have any doubt that he knew what he was doing. I feel like he had absolute confidence because Ehmke had a strong September. He had great outings. He was doing well. He hadn't overpitched that year, so he was certainly rested. And the element of the surprise would be too good. I mean, the president's there. I mean, the whole world was watching Game 1, and I think he was doing a performance to make sure people didn't know that it was that it was already in his head what to do. He made it look like, yeah, let me ask Howard. Like one of the newspapers says, he walked over to Howard and he says, "How are you feeling?" And I thought, that's for show. Like that's Connie Mack knowing this is a show as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's so dramatic on many fronts, and I could just imagine Lefty Grove, who was the ace, wondering, what the hell?
Why not me?
I know.
Yeah.
It's opening day, the president. Yeah. Then we kind of historically know what happened. He wins that first game. That's the shock value. That's the Howard Ehmke, flash moment. And the A's win the series. I mean, they kind of, again, the legend is sort of, with that momentum, the A's surprised the mighty Cubs and beat them. Did he come back to Silver Creek? Was there a hero's welcome?
I haven't seen anything like that. In my research, I've not seen any mention of him coming back. The things that I saw in the Silver Creek newspapers were about him coming back later. Like we'd be like in the 1930s and visiting his mom. In my script, I wanted that to be a part of something that we see. I wanted Silver Creek to be a part, because obviously it's where the story begins, and it's what my entry point to the story was. So I want him to come back in the script and visit his mom, and I put it at Thanksgiving time. Because I felt like Thanksgiving would be an ideal time for him to come back and see family. He's only coming in from Philadelphia, so it's not a terribly long journey. But then I also put in a flashback in August to Silver Creek, where I felt like at some point in the season, when he's struggling with pitching, I thought I'd like to see what he was like when he was 16, 17. I mean, he's still in Silver Creek. He's playing, organized ball. People who are probably not going on to pro baseball at that time, beyond or going on to the majors. He's this guy who people are starting to notice. He's at the very beginning of a promising career. He's, going to head off to LA at some point. He's going to come back and pitch for Buffalo. So I wanted there to be some moment where he hadn't had success, but he was sort of just looking back and thinking to himself, remember the guy who loves the game. Remember the guy who loves playing this game and pitching more than anything else. And we just get a piece of that. But the visit to Silver Creek, I've not seen anything documented about something specific about that. And it makes me a little sad to think, did people not do that? Was it not put in the papers, or did it not actually happen? Did he not come home for some reason because of his business? I mean, his business was at that point probably thriving. I don't know. I'm still having to maybe try to figure that out and dig a little deeper.
Where are you on the script? Is it a final?
So the first version of the script, that's more the sweeping epic version of his story, is done. Last week I started on outlining the shorter 1929 version. I have every scene locked where I like it. I'll start writing it, and I write pretty quickly once I have my scenes locked. I'll probably have it done by September. It shouldn't take me more than a month to have it written. I feel like this is going to be a much stronger version of the story. And also I discovered something else too, is that when I was in touch with the Ehmke manufacturing folks, they made an assumption about their own company. They made the assumption that he retired and started the company, which is not true actually. So in my research, I've found evidence that he possibly started the tarp company as early as when he was pitching for the Red Sox, which was 23, 24, 25, and a bit of 26. He could have started as soon as that, but there is a specific mention in the newspapers about him in 1927, summer of 27, that he is selling, I love the way they worded this too. They don't call it tarpaulin, they don't call it tarp. They said that Howard Ehmke, the Philadelphia A's pitcher, is selling raincoats for stadiums. And I thought, that's funny. Raincoats for stadiums. You're calling infield tarp a raincoat. I don't know if they had a name. I don't know if they really knew what they were referring to, but they had a general sense. But raincoats for stadiums is kind of a cute and clever way to say it. So in fact, their company's older than they think by a few years.
I think I've seen some advertising of Ehmke back in 26. I think the Silver Creek Historical Society has something that might be that time period. So what happens then? You're now focused in on 1929. You got your scenes in your mind's eye and blocked out is the term you used. What's a normal process? Then you end up with your final script. You send it to somebody to look at?
Yeah, once I have a final script, I would definitely want to get script coverage, and I can find people who excel and have the expertise in that, where they'll look at it and tell me, like, does this story work? Does the structure work? Do we get the payoff we want? Is it satisfying? All those things I want to get that kind of response to. But even before that, I'll probably send it to the Ehmke manufacturing folks, because I sent them the first version of the long script, mainly because I wanted them to see it and see where I was in my progress, but also because I wanted one of their technical people to give me some consultation on the actual manufacturing of tarp, because that's something that's not in the script yet. It's like we see Howard working, we know what he's working on, we get a sense that he's in a shop, home shop working, and eventually in a company shop. But I want to get a sense of somebody saying, okay, these are the steps he would take to manufacture it himself. I have more general thoughts of what I want to accomplish. And in fact, in the original script, in the one that's more sweeping, is that I have him coming home to Silver Creek and running into an old baseball buddy and testing out his tarp. And I thought it would be a nice touch, and maybe he did that. I don't know. We don't know. None of that was necessarily documented, so I don't know if he ever did come home during that time he was developing it. But I thought on the ball field would be something that I could see it's reasonable to think if somebody's inventing something, they would go to places where they could get access to a ball field, and he would not be able to test it out at his home field at Shibe Park. He wouldn't be able to test it out anywhere. So I thought if he had one place to test it out, it'd be the baseball field he played on in Silver Creek, or one of them in Chautauqua County. He's home visiting his mom, and there he is, running into a buddy. He's stretching the tarp out, and he's, waiting for rain. I see that moment of him, like, praying for rain and the rain coming. So again, how these stories kind of work is that these pieces can be fictionalized to convey what might have been, what could have happened, for the purpose of the story. And I think seeing him with tarp in Silver Creek would be a nice touch.
Do you have the patent? I mean, I think he got a patent, I think, for the tarp.
Yes.
Did you got that from the patent department?
I've not gotten that from the patent department yet, no. I think that should be something that gets included in either a epilogue or a prologue. I think this is going to need a little bit of setup. I think if you're going to drop somebody into the story of Howard Ehmke, I think you need to set up the fact that there's great pitchers that we know of. There's great baseball players of that era that we know of. This is a guy who played among them and was respected by them. But he's not a name you're going to know. It's unlike a lot like everything I saw in the 30s and 40s. Howard Ehmke's name always comes up. That 13-striker game always comes up. The newspapers always were running his name. I assume that people probably through the next 20 years after that record was set knew his name. I feel like he was still a household name because his name was recurring in the papers. But after the record was broken, I feel like that's when his fame fell off. But even Connie Mack says that outing was his favorite Howard Ehmke moment of his career. I mean, that says something. But even people today don't know Connie Mack in the same way either, right? These people fade, and I like the idea of bringing them back to life where people can understand who is Connie Mack, who was Howard Ehmke, how did they end up on the same team, how did he end up in that game, and he's a regular guy just like you and me, and he comes from a small town, rural place, and learned to love the game, and just happened to have the right trajectory to get him to the biggest game of all, the World Series.
I'm going to tie all this in for you. Tie us all together. Here's Chautauqua County. Because I, too, was a big fan of Ron Guidry, but for different reasons. Mm-hmm. For different reasons. He has I believe a son, maybe a brother, who's developmentally disabled.
Brother, yep.
And I was intimately involved with a resource center here, which deals with developmentally disabled people. And so I actually spent a lot of time trying to get Ron Guidry here to do a project on behalf of the resource center, which would obviously acknowledge his brother. Came close, came very close. So subsequently, I got lucky. And this is where it ties in with Howard Ehmke, because the person I reached out to on the very first game of the Jamestown team, which had against Brooklyn. Brooklyn came into the New York Penn League. The very first game happened to be in Jamestown. The guy I invited as the guest to throw out the first pitch was Carl Erskine.
Oh my goodness.
Why did I choose Carl Erskine? And lucky to get him, because his son was developmentally disabled, and he was our featured speaker at the Resource Center.
Oh, wow.
And so we have Carl Erskine, Ron Guidry, the Resource Center, Howard Ehmke, Carl Erskine breaking the record, all of that kind of here in Chautauqua County. And he talked about that series in that particular game. So I'm sitting here listening to all this stuff, and my brain is blowing up just on that little nugget, which has nothing to do with anything other than it all kind of happened here in Chautauqua.
I love that. Absolutely love that. I have a scene where Erskine is breaking the record. And what I think I love about the internet is you can go back to those games and you can get a play-by-play of who got hits and that sort of thing. And I think Baseball Reference does a great job with that. And I remember going back to the game where Erskine breaks the record. And while he's breaking the record, Ehmke and his wife are in their car, and they've driven somewhere to listen to the game. They're not at home. Back then, there was more games at night, mostly during the day during Ehmke's time. But in the 50s, they started having day and night games, and I'm imagining them driving out of Philadelphia, somewhere rural, and listening on the radio. And I read the newspaper account about it, and they listened to the very last pitch, and there's Ehmke listening to Erskine breaking his record, and how it must probably break his heart in some way that this record that defined his life, in some ways defined his baseball career, is lost. And this is one of those moments where newspaper writers really understand a sense of drama, and they included this little bit at the end, is as soon as the game was done, Howard Ehmke turned the radio off, and because it had been running on accessory power, he had no battery. So the car didn't start. And I thought there's something just absolutely metaphorical about you lost the record, now your car won't start, now you and your wife are stranded somewhere in the middle of nowhere.
You lost your power.
Yeah, you lost your power, exactly. You lost your power, and how bittersweet that is. And I think I like that ending, and I still would include it, because even as a flash forward from 1930 to 1953, I think it says to the audience, this is why you didn't know his name. This very reason. If his record had never been broken, we still would be talking about him every year. Someone would get close, in the World Series, and we'd be talking about Howard Ehmke again. This is the reason, this scene, this moment, that World Series game, is the reason you don't know his name. So to me, it would tie it all together that's why we don't know him. And that's the purpose. This whole movie was to say to you, because of that moment, you lost knowing this guy, and now we have access to him once again.
Let me give you more drama.
Yeah.
Let me give you more drama. When Carl Erskine was here, he played the Take Me Out to the Ball Game in his harmonica.
Oh.
In the baseball booth. I have video of this. I filmed it.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful. So there he is with it turned out a Jamestown hat on, not a Brooklyn hat, a Jamestown hat, and he's playing it very close. So you can have Take Me Out to the Ball Game. So there's Carl Erskine pitch, and now you have Take Me Out to the Ball Game, and you got this Howard Ehmke montage as it's baseball related, and all of a sudden, of course, the song ends. He ends. It's a piece of video drama. I'll make that available to you.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that a lot.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm thinking my brain is exploding here because of all of this stuff here. Because we did have access to Erskine, and we have hours of interviews with him.
Carl Erskine from Anderson, Indiana, was admired by his teammates and adored by the fans. Erskine pitched 2 no-hitters, won 20 games in 1953, and set a record by striking out 14 Yankees in 1 game of the 1953 World Series. And he was blessed with the name that best suited the unique Brooklynese tongue, Oysk. Hey, Oysk, we're with you.
We have a special guest this evening. Once again, Mr. Carl Erskine on the harmonica. Let's all join in the singing.
We have a new invention, the top of the 8th stretch. Everybody get up and join our friend Carl Erskine from the Brooklyn Dodgers as he plays Take Me Out to the Ballgame. The top of the 8th stretch.
I couldn't get it.
What is that, buddy? Make it up.
Only in minor league baseball.
Biz, right? Run it out. I'll tell you what, gentlemen.
Not only is it their first Dodger team back, it's the first time in the top of the 8th. Yeah. The home crowd stood and sang and take me out.
I think as Greg said, only in minor league baseball.
I'm excited. I mean, oh my God, I can't wait for you to do that. Walk over there with Vince Martonis, who's listened to this whole thing. Randy Anderson, who's, among other things, brought this book, which you probably have seen. Have you seen it?
I have seen that book, yeah.
You know, and just as resources and stuff he's got at the Sports Hall of Fame. And just, again, it could be just moments of additional videography or whatever it happens to be. But what's your sense if you get the script, you get people who read it, they react, they critique it. At some point, you have to produce it and get somebody to take it to the next level.
Well, I'll tell you the story. Since you're here, I'll tell you the story. So what happened was, I was in this webinar, and they had Scott Bakula on, and he's talking about baseball things. I'm thinking, I need to ask a question. But we're not asking it directly. We have to type in a question, and then the host asks it. Mm-hmm. So I said, I have to get in my project. I have to get in my Howard Ehmke project. And if I get my project in, I can ask a question on the heels of that. And so I did. So I typed it out. I said, I was a screenwriter. I worked on this script about Howard Ehmke winning the 1929 World Series Game 1, et cetera, et cetera. Connie Mack put him in as a so-called surprise starter. Here's my question. The host read the whole thing. And I watched as Scott Bakula was eating it up and very much enjoying what he was saying. And as he was listening to basically a pitch of my script, I started imagining Scott Bakula playing Connie Mack, which I can totally see. I can totally see him playing Connie Mack. He's got the look, and you obviously with a little bit of aging and some makeup. I'm like, Scott Bakula is Connie Mack. I can see the casting now.
Oh, no. Oh, that's hilarious. Yeah. Oh, my God.
So at some point, when I get this next script done, I definitely want to give it to Scott Bakula's representation.
So back to the decision by Mack to pitch Ehmke.
Yeah.
Didn't he go so far as to try out someone else to warm up, to continue the ruse that it wasn't going to be?
Yes, because the idea was that he did not want people to know that he already chosen, and he was even pacing. So he was pacing in the dugout during this time, back and forth, and looking at other pitchers.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he put somebody else out there. Was it?
I thought it was like
Grove.
It was, yes, I think it was Grove, but I thought it was also Mose. Was it?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I got this thing in my head that it was a great charade.
Yeah.
That he went through, but clearly he planned to do this for a month.
I think he felt like it had to be something big. A big surprise would definitely throw the team off, right? Like, I think managers and owners are great strategists in general, but in 1929 to be the kind of person to pull that kind of trick, That's next level. That's next level thinking.
So
that
now I'm thinking, I'm a player on the A's that day. First game of the World Series. Our best guy is Grove. And here comes Ehmke. I'm thinking, what the hell did you just do, Connie?
Yeah. What's
What
on
have
your
you
mind?
done, Mr.
What are you
Mack?
thinking? Yeah.
What are you doing to us?
Yeah.
Am I right? I'm thinking that maybe that wasn't a popular decision among the players.
I think there would have been some hostility, possibly even, right? If you know you're guaranteed winners, I mean, you've had a great season. But also keep in mind, too, that when he made that decision, if he had Ehmke scouting in August, they were not doing well in the second half of August. So there's Howard Ehmke scouting the Cubs, at Baker Bowl. They're off playing, the A's are off playing in Chicago against the White Sox. They're doing not as great as they were the rest of the season. They hit mid-August, they're struggling a bit. I'm wondering if that was a factor too when we started looking at Howard Ehmke, thinking, I think they went something like 6-9 in the last 15 games. I'm wondering if he saw them starting to have a downward slide, then he sees Ehmke doing well in September. And again, he's still a fan of his pitcher. He's still a fan of Howard, right? In general, like he knows he has the ability. He just questions his. That's why I kept using the term, what was it, indifference. They kept using the term indifference in the papers. That was Howard just not. Did he lose his love of the game? Was he not as focused? Was he not as ready for pitching outings? Was he too focused on the tarp? Like I wonder if all these things were sort of variables in this teammates' thinking. He didn't go on that series, that West Trip series, and nor did he go to the Yankee Stadium. So when they left for Chicago, he was not in baseball for a solid 6 days, except for watching the Cubs. So I'm wondering if Connie Mack was just thinking at that point, maybe this is an experiment that could have a big payoff. It's definitely a surprise. It's hard to say, it's hard to read his mind, but it's. Yeah. I feel like in August that's what set it in motion. It was them struggling in August, and Ehmke has not pitched a lot this season, and let's give him the test and see what he does.
Mack appeared to be quite fond of Ehmke.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any reason to know why he was fond of him?
On a personal level, I saw it later, even after Ehmke retired, that he wrote a letter that was basically like an endorsement of Howard Ehmke in the 1940s. And I thought, this is a guy who thinks of Ehmke. And they even got together, I want to say, on some sort of reunion. There was more like a reunion later on. And I thought, he's treating him like a son, more than just a ball player. I feel like he had this sort of affinity for him, almost like a family member. And that also makes me wonder if Howard's own lack of a family, I mean, he was married, but he didn't have kids, if Connie Mack saw him in this sort of vulnerable way, that maybe this is a guy who needs somebody as a father figure. His father had died at that point. Howard's father had died like 1920s, or not around 1920. I mean, that's all speculation, but I start thinking from the human side of interaction. If you're an owner and a manager and you have a player that has no father, has no family, lives for the game, like would you have a different emotional investment in a player that you felt like didn't have connections outside to ground them? You're not grounded if you're childless and you have no family in the area. You're basically just,
Mac seemed to always make decisions based on what was good for the pocketbook.
Yeah.
And but with Ehmke, I don't know that it was a pocketbook decision. It seemed like it was something more than.
Mm-hmm.
I think there was a connection between the two, and I always wondered what it was.
Yeah. I think that to me, that's the most interesting relationship in the whole script, is how those two saw each other. Because there's meetings between the two of them. I mean, even in the spring training meetings, when he goes to spring training, and he's going to sign a contract that's for less money each year. Like he's not going to make. What does that do to the player, and how does that get conveyed by Connie Mack? How is he explaining it? But then when I read about the fact that in 1930 he's signing him to a contract, he's
not going to play.
He's not going to play. He names him a pitching coach, and he's out of baseball by May, but he still gets paid for the whole year. And I thought, Connie Mack definitely has some affinity for him that goes beyond the ball player. If you're going to offer to give him the whole salary and keep making sure he gets paid for the year, even if he doesn't play anymore, that's a pretty big deal in 1930. Beginning of the Depression, right? Like this, it's not, money's still tight at that point.
Now, switching gears, which is how my mind works. Back to the tarp thing. Now, Howard didn't use the first tarp ever. I mean, tarps had been used,
Yeah.
correct? Am I right
Oh,
on
yeah.
that?
So even in one of the World Series in 1925, there was a World Series where they mentioned a rain delay and a tarp being used. I don't think it was customized, though. I think the difference was it wasn't customized for the use they had. Yeah.
And the fact that Howard did get a patent shows that he used it in a way that hadn't been used before.
Well, and you have to have ease of use, too. So it has to be able to customly fit the infield specifications, and it has to be able to be something stored close by and moved to the field in rather rapid fashion. Like I watched the tarp, today go out. In seconds, they have that ground covered. Sometimes they're so fast where someone falls underneath. I love those videos. They always crack me up. Someone they're crawling underneath to get out. But I think about the fact that he probably saw an opportunity because there was a lot of rain delays. I mean, in those years, if you look at the schedules, there's a number of games that he happened to pitch just by chance that Howard pitched that were rain delay postponed games. And you'll see it on the Baseball Reference. We'll say this was postponed from April 15th or May 25th. I don't know why it was in his career, but he happened to be somebody who pitched a lot of those makeup games. I don't know if that was part of the inspiration for him. He was always the one pitching the game that got moved. And they got moved deeper into the season. They maybe moved a couple months or 3 months down the road. And so he was the guy who often took to the mound and pitched that game.
I thought I read somewhere that the first recorded use of a tarp was in Pittsburgh.
Yes.
Does that sound right?
I think it was Forbes Field, yeah.
Yeah, Forbes
Yeah.
Field, and the manager was Clark?
It was in 1925? I think it was the
earlier
1920s.
than
Oh,
that.
even before that.
Even earlier. They covered the field with something.
Yeah.
But maybe not, maybe just around home base, not the entire infield.
Yeah.
I don't know.
In the series, in the 1925 series, you had the guys who, you had like the clowns, clown princes of baseball during the rain delays doing fun things. Like that to me felt like a scene too, where we're seeing a tarp going down, a rough tarp or whatever it looks, just some rough version of a tarp. And we're seeing these baseball players like clowning around and like sliding into the water. I thought that would be a fun scene to include. Yeah.
That would be lots of fun.
I mean, because it definitely captures the era that we're in, that 1920s, that almost anything goes, and baseball was a big form of entertainment, and there's these guys that did recurring, crazy little hijinks on the field to entertain and amuse people while they're sitting there in the stands and the game's not being played.
Well, I noticed you commented on my Facebook post today.
Yes.
Where I showed Howard Ehmke and Bob Shockey. The opening day pictures of Yankee Stadium in 23. So Ehmke's pitching for Boston at the time, and Shockey was pitching for the Yankees. Fast forward, Vince, and maybe you don't know this, but Bob Shockey became the manager of the Jamestown Falcons in 1950. All right. So there's a Chautauqua County connection to the opening day of the original Yankee Stadium. But just crazy crap, all this. Yeah. This Erskine story that Greg's telling,
Well,
crazy.
I found another tie to the Yankees when I was doing research in the area. I found that there was a player, catcher, I think, for the Yankees pre-Babe Ruth, who played in 1914, 1915 from Angola. He's buried in Angola. And his name is escaping me at the moment. He played very little. I mean, this was a handful of games. This is somebody you would forget about in a heartbeat. But he leveraged playing for the Yankees in a political career. He was always the guy who played for the Yankees. He became a member of Congress. He was representing a district in Western New York. He died of a heart attack in D.C. While he was announcing he was running for mayor of Buffalo. And again, in all the stories, former Yankee.
Former Yankee.
And he probably played less than 20 games, but he was always a former Yankee. He just rode that wave of of being tied to the club. I thought, what an interesting life. You put the uniform on a couple dozen times, and there you are.
So Vince, do you know if there was a welcome home celebration for Howard after the 29 World Series? Do you have any knowledge of that?
Yeah, I'll show you the newspaper article. It was a pretty big one.
Yes.
In 29?
At dinner, and I don't know the exact date, but it was soon after.
Whoa, this is awesome.
It was soon after. And
Yes.
So now
they
you're
gave
not
him an
making it up.
Yeah.
They gave him an engraved watch, which I have seen. I borrowed it for a short time. I tried to keep track of it, but it's in a family. It's disappeared on me, even though I tried contacting. Hopefully that it was going to be given back to, come back to Silver Creek someday.
Yeah.
So there was an engraved watch. I had the writing on the back of it, but it's gone right now. But they had a big celebration. I'll show you the article.
That's wonderful.
And did he come back on a train? And people were standing at the train station. I'm making this stuff up.
I mean, that's how you would expect it to be, right? Like that's the hero's welcome, right?
Yeah, on a train.
How he came back, I'm not sure, but he came back quite a few times because he was originally he was a player for the Silver Creek Horseshoes.
Yes.
The local team.
The local team, the
And
Horseshoes.
Yes, he came back and he pitched, just fooling around and attended games, and I got a couple of pictures of him, with people around him at the ball field.
Oh, I love that.
Horseshoe ball field, and he had a big family, so there was quite a few family members in the Silver Creek area, brothers and sisters and uncles, and yeah. So he had reasons to come back. You're right about the father.
Yeah.
But there was plenty of family there, and he was very close. He was one of the youngest brothers. I think there was only one younger than him. He had I'll show you pictures of them too. I got them standing all as a family.
Tell me again, Vince, why was he called Bob?
A good question. I'm not sure. That's something I always wondered. If he was given the nickname maybe in his high school sports for some reason. I don't know why. I mean, he played basketball. He played baseball. I have pictures of that too.
Have you seen
called Bob within the family, or was he called Bob by Connie Mack and his teammates?
I never saw a reference to Bob
Me
from
neither.
Yeah.
Not from
Connie
a
Mack.
lot in some of your stuff, Vince.
Yeah.
Bob.
It was
Howard Bob Ehmke.
He might have gotten it nicknamed
Within the
from his
family?
brothers. Yeah, from his brothers. I don't know.
But not within the baseball world. I've not seen it. Yeah.
No.
Not in
Interesting.
baseball.
Not in
So,
baseball
okay,
world.
so I'll tell you what I do know possibly about that, is when I went to the Silver Creek Library, they have yearbooks going way back, and there's some of those types of nicknames in the era, like around the era he's playing, where it's somebody it's not like Richard and Rich, or William and Bill. It's not that nickname. It's like a nickname that would be on someone's senior year photo that would have nothing to do with their actual name. And I was wondering where those nicknames came from, and if it's something like that where there was some sort of a pet name of affection for people.
You never know how a name generates, where a name might generate. But I'll tell you a funny thing you just reminded me of. My name is Vince, so when I go through a drive-through and I order something, I say, "What's your name?" I say, "Vince." They, "What? Dennis?" "No, Vince." No, how to spell that? And it's a banner. So years ago,
That's awesome.
2, 3, 4 years ago, I decided I'm Bob.
Oh, that's
Seriously,
yeah.
I did. And now
Yeah.
when I order, "What's your name, Bob?" Easy.
Yeah, they'll never mess it up now.
Never mess it up. No more Vince, I'm Bob. All the time. That's funny.
I love
I
that.
didn't think of that with Howard, but that's what I do now. At restaurants, anywhere I go, they ask me for a name, I'm Bob.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, Forever Bob. That should be your autobiography, Forever Bob now.
Yeah, forever Bob. Maybe that's something like that happened with Howard. I don't know, maybe it's kind of long.
Yeah.
You got a 6-letter name. Let's shorten it out. You're Bob. And a coach wrote it down. Who knows?
Who knows?
Maybe the stories are somewhere in the newspapers, but yeah.
Was there anything in your research that recognized why he didn't have kids, or what would the impact of him not having kids was on him
No,
and his
I've never
wife?
read anything
Yeah.
about that. Nothing personal.
Yeah.
I don't know of any letters that exist. I tracked down just about everything. We'll see. I've got tons of stuff
Yeah.
here. If you got time to leaf through it, you can
Sure.
check it out.
Yeah, because I was wondering about that, and I thought it must have been very challenging for a couple in the 1920s to not have children. I mean, it seems like it'd be a very rare thing. If there was a medical issue or something else that was going on.
I tend to think it might have been medical because, you know, he liked kids a lot. He was
Yeah.
always there with, he's pictured with kids
Yeah.
quite a bit. And he was always described as a kind man and a gentleman. Maybe that's one of the things Connie Mack liked about him.
Yeah.
He wasn't a hooligan like many
No.
ball players of that era.
Calm.
Yeah. Well, you know the new efforts to restore Ty Cobb's name, right?
No, I
You guys seen
don't.
that? So apparently there's a movement that wants to have a new look at Ty Cobb's personality and career, feeling like maybe there was some unjust views of it back in the day.
You know the story? Is it true about Cobb telling Ehmke to hit these batters and he wouldn't hit them? And then they had a fight in the tunnel?
Yep, they had a fight. There was a very,
Yeah.
And then because of that personal issue they had, he ends up trading him.
Yep.
And then I love how the newspapers wrote about how, you know, Ehmke goes to the Red Sox and how it was a dumb move by Ty Cobb to trade him because he could have easily won 20 games with Detroit if they could back him, and he won 20 games once in his career. But he was too good to trade, basically what the newspapers were saying. And they're right. I mean, he was a good player, a good pitcher, but he had a personal issue with Ty Cobb that kept him.
Did they become teammates in Philadelphia?
Yeah, they did, and I don't include a lot of that except for there's a mention. He does appear in some of the games in the 1926-27. But since I go mainly jump ahead in time, I don't dive into a lot of the fact that Ty Cobb is there is enough, right? Like we know that he's on the team, but it's not like I don't do a deep dive in those scenes that what their conflict still is at that
Have you
point.
seen the photo of Mack in the center and Cobb and Ehmke?
Yeah,
Okay, I got that here too.
yeah, I'd love to see that here.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna just, for the camera, this is Ripley's Believe It or Not,
Really?
okay?
Okay.
This is Judge Waters. Judge Waters, a federal district court judge in Texas. And he is the person, and one of the many judges in Texas dealing with immigration cases. You know, all that borderline, hot political stuff.
Yeah.
But he's from Brockton, New York.
What?
Okay?
I had no idea.
So I learned from a guy named Jeb Bobstein, Mike Bobstein's son, who works in my firm, Phillips Lytle. Let me start, you can't make this stuff up. And so Jeb works now as the number 3 guy in the U.S. Attorney's Office in Buffalo. Calls me one day, how you doing? You know, sorry, I missed you at Phillips Lytle this time. That's my lover. And he goes, by the way, my teacher at a U.S. Attorney's Conference was Judge Waters. Judge Waters in Brockton, New York. And you can research it, but he's the only person, only United States federal judge ever from Chautauqua County. Ever. And of course, first reaction is, what do you mean? I'm in the Justice Robert Jackson Center. He's born in Pennsylvania. Okay?
Oh.
So,
Okay.
birth, accident of birth, he's in Pennsylvania for 5 years. So Judge Waters, now I'm Chautauqua County guy. So I've been trying to get a hold of him. I want to invite him here. Now that's a celebratory moment. Judge, federal judge, immigration, the only guy ever. Chautauqua County, role model, and let's do something for students.
Yeah.
He's all in. Now here's the lead, man. You're not going to believe this. He goes, Greg, I know all about you. I've researched you, Robert Jackson, da-da-da. You played football for my grandfather. What? And I go, exactly. I go, what? You know, I'm thinking Brockton, I can do Brockton. No, I spent a lot of time in Jamestown, and my grandfather was Tom Cusimano.
Go, get out of town.
Exactly. And
This
I go,
is great.
absolutely. Up until he died, he was near and dear. And he always talked about me to other people. And so I get, wow, you're in Texas, Brockton, and somehow your grandfather was my football coach. And I said, unbelievable. And I said, the reason I'm here to talk to you is because, ironically, I am currently, as we speak, in the Robert Jackson Center. I want you as the federal judge to be here at the Robert Jackson Center, da-da-da-da. And I'm talking to a guy about Howard Ehmke, who's from Silver Creek, New York, another Chautauqua County guy. I'm in the middle of the interview. And he goes, wow, you're not going to believe this, but I went to school in Brockton with an Ehmke, who was a relative of Howard Ehmke. And I go, that's unbelievable. Now, Greg, I also got to stop you for a second. Now, this is, hold the ceiling up here. And you go, I can't believe this either. He goes, technically, I wasn't born in Brockton. I grew up, I went schooling, everything but accident of birth. I was born in a place in New York you've never heard of. I go, what's that? Ogdensburg, New York.
No way.
Get out of here.
That's crazy.
Exactly. I go, well, I'm with a guy named Marc Isaacs from Ogdensburg, New York. And he goes, that's insane. It's got incestuous. It's now totally, that's the phone call.
That was amazing.
That's just Ripley's Believe It or Not.
Yeah.
So he's coming, and he's...
So, Greg, I'm sorry, his mother is Coach Kuz's daughter, right?
Yep,
Priscilla?
Yep.
Get out.
Where do we start singing It's a Small World After All? We should
Get out of here.
we should be all singing that. That's crazy. That is crazy.
Ogdensburg.
Yeah.
So you probably could look up Waters, Watters.
Okay, so Waters, Watters.
Two T's.
That's
Ogdensburg.
part of my ancestry. Waters. I have Waters in my ancestry. I need to look.
Oh.
Now I really need to look that up.
Yeah, you're making that up.
No, I wish I wasn't making that up. No, on my grandmother's, my maternal grandmother's side, there's Waters. I have to look this up now to see if this person's now a cousin of mine.
Wow.
That would be crazy.
Well, since you're moving here, we will be having an event sometime in the fall. Now the scene is set. I got this federal judge says, I'm all in. I'll come here. I'll do whatever you want, Greg. I'm thinking a whole bunch of Chautauqua County students.
Yeah.
Saying, this guy's, you have no idea. Not only, he's in immigration, so it's a hot topic. That alone tells the story. But
Yeah.
oh, by the way, he's a Chautauqua County kid.
That's wild.
So, and there's been no other. None. Zero. He's the guy.
But not born here, but raised here.
Yeah, for all intents and purposes, he was born in Ogdensburg.
That's so crazy.
So-
What I don't like about Wikipedia is when you look up notable people from a town, I like the people who are raised here is fine, born here is fine, but the problem is if they're just born here and they leave, what does that give us? If they were born here and they just leave, within a couple of years, they're not really a native of the town, in my mind. It's a little misleading.
Well, they use the term native means born here.
Yeah.
A resident of this town.
Yeah.
So, I go, Judge, with all due respect, I'm in the legal business. That's a distinction without a difference.
Yes.
He goes,
Yes.
You're right.
Yes.
Your Honor, we're not gonna, it's like Jackson. Chautauqua County lays claim to him, but for 5 years, he was actually in Pennsylvania. So, anyways, so that's what just happened.
That's wonderful. I'm glad that I was here to be in the vicinity of that happening. Because honestly, I feel like when I'm around places, like magical things happen anyway, so.
So check out, if you're
Yeah.
related to this guy, that'll be,
I'll talk to my mom because she has the whole family tree. But yeah, Waters is one of our
2
T's, yeah.
Jesus.
That's so funny.
Anyways,
And I know where he was born too. He had to be born in Hepburn Hospital.
yep.
Yeah. Ehmke, I think people need to know his story. I think I was telling you, everyone I talked to about this, including you, like I don't understand how we don't have these things already in place. Gogolak is the same thing to me. Like I don't understand how people don't know this story, how it's not a movie by now, a TV show, something that I think these are great stories. I don't know what the holdup has been. I think with Ehmke, it's because it's a period piece. That's probably one of the challenging things is you're talking about 1929. But then I see things like 1923. I see other shows on the air that are period pieces. So there's no reason we can't have a 1929 movie.
Yeah.
But you got me thinking about Jamestown again because I think we talked about this on the phone too, that when I saw the sign at the park where Babe Ruth hit the ball into Chautauqua Lake, I've not stopped talking to people about this story because I thought, well, that's a cool feat. Like, what a neat idea. And hearing the story that somebody told me in Mayville that, they knew somebody who retrieved that ball. And he sold that ball. And I was like, how much did he sell it for? He said, 5 cents. And I'm like, what? He said it probably was around the time that the ball was retrieved. But I didn't know until going to that park that was a big national story. I thought it was just, oh, Babe Ruth is playing an exhibition game. I had no idea it's Byline Jamestown, Byline Jamestown, Byline Jamestown, all these newspapers talking about Babe Ruth is he's not obeying the commissioner. He's playing an exhibition game. He played the World Series and he's not supposed to be playing in exhibition games, and the Major League Baseball is not making money. And Babe Ruth threatening to quit. He's going to go start his own league. And when I discovered that, it blew my mind because I had already started developing a script about Babe Ruth, and not Babe Ruth's baseball career. I was trying to figure out a time where Babe Ruth leaves baseball and does something else and goes to Hollywood, because Babe made a lot of movies, right? So in my concept, he leaves in 1919 before he goes to the Yankees. But then when I started reading about Jamestown, I thought, no, that script is going to be about Babe Ruth, the fantasy of Babe Ruth leaving baseball because Landis suspends him, and he decides he's going to just go try his hand in Hollywood. So it's more of a fantasy about what would happen if Babe Ruth, joined the likes of Charlie Chaplin and silent movie generation and became a silent movie star. So it's more like just this my own imagination of what that might have looked like if Babe Ruth was the Sultan of swap. At that point, he's swapping careers and he's becoming a star of black and white. So that's something that down the road I'll explore more.
Well, you're talking to the guy who, how long ago was it? 20 years ago, maybe, Randy? That I did the research, because I always thought that was an urban legend. So I'm a member of the Society of American Baseball Research. So I'd heard that. Babe Ruth hit one end of the lake. I mean, that's the legend.
Yeah.
And I said, that's kind of bullshit, but I'm going to dig.
Yeah,
I'm going to dig deep.
Yeah.
And so there is a monograph at the Sports Hall of Fame, which I did maybe 30 years ago, maybe more, on that whole story of him in the 1921 World Series, gets hurt. The Yankees are up 3-1. He gets hurt sliding, can't play the rest of the series. He's under the ban of Kennesaw Mountain Landis, that thou shalt not go barnstorm. And he and Bob Musil decide, the hell with it, we're going. Grabs a team and then starts it along and comes to Cell Run, and that's a cost. I mean, all the headlines, we've got them all. 1, Ruth coming, 2, Landis to suspend, and all of this stuff. And sure enough, during the batting practice is when he hits one in the lake. But he's here for a couple days. Lefty Lyle Parkhurst's dad, he was a famous guy here, was the barber who cut his hair. Somebody did this. He was seen at the Palace Theater. So we have everything, all these ads from the newspaper, because it's loaded. Babe Ruth.
Yeah.
And at the same time, Landis. And at Barrow with the president and Colonel Houston, just like, come home, stop the damn thing, because you're going to be suspended. And no, not only does he hit one in the lake during the exhibition, he plays. The next day it gets worse. This is the guy who can't play the World Series a week earlier.
Yeah.
Next day he's in Warren, Pennsylvania, right down the road, and we got those papers too. He's pitching. He's pitching, not just a guy who swings, on a bad leg or something. No, he's pitching in the game. 2 days later, is the whole thing ends, and he ends his tour. Only to be suspended, and then there was a lot of begging and hand wringing and all, great forgiveness. And there's a great picture of Landis kind of reinstating Musil and Ruth. So yeah, I did it. Anyways, the postscript, all that stuff. Back to your story about baseball. After this went public, and it was in the Post Journal, and it was at the Babe Ruth World Series, they printed this whole thing. And I must have had 5 separate guys come in with waterlogged baseballs, all signed by Babe Ruth. So someplace, somewhere in the bottom of my desk drawer are these waterlogged baseballs that people thought was really cute.
Tell me one was misspelled. Tell me one of them at least was misspelled. That someone didn't even know how to spell Babe Ruth. This says Babe Roth. I'm sorry. This is Babe Roth. That's definitely not Babe Ruth.
Yeah, he was bigger than the commissioner.
Oh, of course he felt that way. But with the Black Sox scandal, you got to put the hammer down somewhere. Was it true that I read somewhere that he talked to a group of boys about tobacco?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. At the Palace, or one of the theaters, at Winter Garden Theater. Yeah, the
Yeah.
evils of alcohol and the evils of tobacco.
The evils. Because wasn't he doing advertising for tobacco at the time? Don't do as I do, guys. Boys, I'm Babe Ruth. I can smoke a cigarette, but you guys can't. That's what I kind of gathered from that.
There was a big article on that, yeah. The evils of cigarettes, evils of alcohol and cigarettes.
Don't eat hot dogs and drink beer before baseball, boys. This is not a good recipe.
So it's funny you should be onto that story because Randy's probably got my file someplace. So,
I love it.
we digress, and we can go. We're obviously in a deep, dark rabbit hole here.
Yes, no question, but we're in the good rabbit
This
hole.
is just the first inning of a long 9-inning.
Look at you using metaphors. Yes. First inning, and then we're going to probably go into extra innings.